We have started recording. If you're not into being on this recording, we record these and put them on our YouTube channel. So people that aren't able to attend can go back and get the information. If that bothers you at all, just if you have a question or something like that, just throw it in the chat. Keep yourself off of video and all of that if you prefer. All right. We're going to go ahead and get started here. People still in the waiting room. Yeah, so I can go ahead and actually put the YouTube in the chat here. I'm also going to include my email, just in case you need it. All right. So welcome, everybody. I'd like to thank you for joining us today. So our guest today is Erika Rhett Hunt from Pierce County's Planning and Public Works. She is going to be explaining the Housing for All or Housing All Planning tool, what it is, how it's being used, what the tool means for housing allocations ahead of the 2024 periodic update. It's going to be I think it's going to be a really good one. I think a lot of people are excited for this one. So the series is going to continue through December, and I do encourage you to sign up for our newsletter so that you can continue to receive regular invites to these presentations and others like it. So that's the best way, I think, to get regular invites. And you can find the newsletter sign up on our website. I'll throw that in the chat as well. And all of our events are posted under the events section. You can sign up for the newsletter at the bottom of our page. And you can also review past reference materials, slides, and recordings and such. So my name is Casey Twiggs. I'm the membership coordinator for the Tacoma-Pierce County Affordable Housing Consortium. We are a nonprofit membership-based organization, and we provide public education and advocacy for the expansion of affordable housing in Pierce County. We do this by educating the public on the need for affordable housing, by hosting webinars such as this, meetings, collecting data, and to share with the public and our members. We advocate at the state and local level for policies and funding that support the creation of affordable housing. We have about 60 members that range from affordable housing developers, financiers, construction companies, architects, consultants, as well as individuals. And they are all dedicated to advancing affordable housing in Pierce County. So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about our organization or interested in becoming a member, you can email me directly. My email's in the chat, and you can also check out our website. That is also in the chat. So with that, I'd like to introduce our presenter today. Erika is the long-range planning supervisor for Pierce County. She has more than 2 decades of experience in comprehensive planning, public engagement, and housing, with experience in shoreline planning, environmental review, community needs assessments, rural lands, and neighborhood redevelopment. Outside of work, you might find her enjoying a nice walk. We were just talking about getting outside. The pandemic kind of encouraged us all to find that again. Cheering on the Seattle Sounders and the OL Reign, voting with friends and family, or playing board games and card games. So if you have little housekeeping, if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to type them in the chat as we go along with the presentation, or click the raise hand button, and we can pause the presentation and take questions as we go along, or you can hold them till the end, and we'll have a time for discussion and questions after the presentation as well. And we do ask, if you can, if you're willing to, when you do ask a question or have a comment, if you wouldn't mind taking your your camera off so that we can see you and kind of encourage more of a discussion. If you're comfortable and willing and able to do that. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to you, Erika.
Great. Thank you so much. Let me get my screen sharing started here. Oh, it does say my screen sharing is disabled.
Okay. Hang on just a second. Does that help? Did that do anything?
That did it. Thanks so much, Casey.
Hey, great.
Let's see, screen 2. Okay. So, and please, Casey, could you help me? I may not see if a hand pops up, so please help me with that if a question pops up at the chat.
Absolutely, I will moderate for you.
Thank you. Okay, so thank you so much. I'm Erika Rhett Hunt. I'm the Pierce County Long Range Planning Supervisor, and I certainly recognize a few names on our attendee list here, and then there's a few more of you that I'm not as familiar with. So I hope to get to know you through this presentation or the work that the county does on housing and comprehensive planning. So I know that this series that the consortium has put on has included some other discussions of changes that have been happening at the state level to support planning for housing. I don't plan to go into a deep dive of this, but I do want to give a brief overview just to make sure that we all have the same context to work from. So the Growth Management Act, or GMA, requires communities to prepare comprehensive plans to plan for 20 years of projected growth. And while housing has always been a part of these plans, communities were required to analyze housing needs and set policies to encourage affordable housing in the past. But in 2021, the requirements were changed in GMA, including the first ever change to one of GMA's goals, the goal for housing. That was changed in 2021, and it added more planning requirements. And so for the first time, these planning requirements allowed the Washington State Department of Commerce, they were basically given the responsibility to identify the housing need that communities must plan for. And so, and they do that on a county by county basis. The other thing that the changes included, and these changes were through a House bill called House Bill 1220, but all of the changes were incorporated. House Bill 1220 made changes to the Growth Management Act. And so other changes that it asked communities to make was it directed them to allow middle housing in urban areas. And when we talk about middle housing, we're talking about duplexes, triplexes, and townhomes. It also required communities to remove barriers to these housing types in their development codes. So these are new steps that we didn't have to necessarily plan for before. It also added an equity requirement and the consideration of how racially disparate impacts, what kind of racially disparate impacts there's been to housing policies and codes, both in the past and then the ongoing legacy of those impacts. And it asked communities to address the potential for displacement from housing as communities grow. And we also know from evidence that housing displacement disproportionately impacts households with low income and people of color. So these are big changes in how we think about housing and how we think about setting policies for housing and what the needs are in our communities. So while all of those changes are very important things to consider, today's focus is on the HAPT tool, or the Housing and All Planning tool. The final version of this tool was released on March 1st, 2023. And it really, that tool it speaks to how does the State Department of Commerce determine how much need there is for housing, as well as how it divides that housing up by income band amongst different types of income levels and different households at different income levels. So while the changes related to racially disparate impacts on housing and displacement are very important changes as well, our focus today is really on this housing and all planning tool, or HAPT. The HAPT was developed by Commerce to establish and allocate housing needs for every county in the state. And as I mentioned before, this is a brand new authority that was given to Commerce before to do this. And the HAPT is the tool that Commerce determined implements that authority. What the HAPT does is it estimates existing housing inventory. And in this case, as of 2020, it says, here's how much housing you have in each county by income group. And those income groups are distributed into basically the same kind of AMI categories that we use for other housing applications. So moderate income, low income, very low income, and extremely low income. And those are associated with the same income ranges as we would associate with HUD income levels. It also distinguishes between housing types for permanent supportive housing, and it establishes a need for emergency housing and shelters. So it's a very, very comprehensive tool that looks at housing needs. And then that HAPT provides two methods for distributing those needs between the various cities and towns and unincorporated areas of the county. From a technical standpoint, the Growth Management Act basically creates the county as an instrument of the state. And then from the county level, we work with our cities and towns to help set our growth targets and also determine, how the growth for our county will be distributed amongst our cities and towns. So the HAPT tool does the same thing. And it provides two methods for distributing housing needs by income level between the cities, the towns, and the unincorporated areas of the county. Now, counties are free to use those two methods or develop their own method. And for the first round of periodic review and updates that are required under state law, it affects the Puget Sound region counties, so Kings, Snohomish, Pierce, and Kitsap. And each of the counties has used a little bit of a different method for distributing those needs. So about every decade, the counties and their cities and towns get together to look at these 20-year projections of growth. And we go through a process where we each plan for a certain share of that growth. And what comes out of that is each community basically has what's called a growth target. Growth targets are assigned on the basis of population. How many people are you going to grow by in the next 20 years? How many jobs are you expected to gain in your community over the next 20 years? And then how many housing units are you going to gain? Of course, housing units and population are closely related. So Commerce planned the HAPT tool to basically be a part of that process of deciding how we distribute our growth. And that process is already well established. But unfortunately, the timing of the 2021 change and the Commerce HAPT tool wasn't right for our Puget Sound communities, because these communities, including Pierce County, had already set growth targets. And so when Commerce released its HAPT in 2023, it actually came up with a different estimate of what the county's housing needs were than the county did through its process of adopting its growth targets. So when we think about the difference between these targets, it really boils down to a different set of assumptions that were used to estimate housing needs. So the county looked at that, and we looked at the way that we had made our estimates, which were very individualized for each city and town. And then we looked at the way that Commerce made their estimates in their HAPT tool. And we sat down with them and asked them to come up with a compromise position for us. So we negotiated that compromise with Commerce, but we still needed to readopt our housing targets for consistency with the compromised amount that Commerce that we worked on with Commerce. So the county adopted these new targets in June. You can see them in the ordinance, which I have linked here, but I'm also going to drop them into the chat window. Let me just get my chat window open here. Let's see. Here we go. Okay, there's a link in the chat. So we adopted these new targets in June, and you can open up that ordinance and take a look. I'm going to go to the next slide, which is shows Exhibit B. That's where it has the allocation of the targets by income level for each community in the county. So basically we adopted new total housing targets were set for Pierce County and its cities and towns to match Commerce's overall number of the estimation of county housing need. And when we divided those targets amongst our cities and towns, they were very carefully considered to ensure that they coordinated with Vision 2050, which is our regional growth strategy for the whole Puget Sound area. And basically Vision 2050, that regional growth strategy prioritizes putting new housing into cities and urban areas that are served by transit. So we very carefully looked and divided those up to meet the goals of the regional growth strategy as well. So the second part of the new growth target adoption was also to allocate the housing by income. So it was one thing to readopt a new overall target and distribute the big number amongst the cities and towns, but how are we going to do this allocation of income amongst our cities and towns? Well, the HAPT takes the total estimate of housing need. It divides it up into housing needs by income group, and it also estimates needs for emergency housing. It proposes two different methods of distributing the needs between local jurisdictions. So there's a fair share method, and that method accounts for existing affordable housing that's in communities. But Pierce County ultimately chose the equal share method, where each community takes on an equal share of future housing needs, regardless of how much existing affordable housing they have. So. And this is a snippet of what those allocations look like. For each jurisdiction, there's an estimate of the supply of housing. You can see here, it's 152,322 units is our existing supply in 2020 for unincorporated Pierce County. And it says, here's our overall number of how many more housing units will be needed before 2044 in Pierce County, 32,048. And then when you look at the categories above, you can see that it's divided into income brackets: extremely low, very low, low, moderate, etc., for percentage of area median income. So it breaks this 32,000 down into these categories. It estimates what the supply in each of those. So if we take a look at the extremely low income category of 0 to 30% AMI, it divides it into the target into permanent supportive housing and non-permanent supportive housing. And that the way that that target is divided has to do with a formula that's in the HAPT tool. Both are based on housing units, although for permanent supportive housing, it was assumed that these would be one-person households. You also will see in this pink column here, we have emergency housing needs. And the emergency housing needs are calculated by beds because it's assumed that the emergency housing needs are primarily met through shelters. So for every community that's in Pierce County, even for Auburn, which it only has a little bit of jurisdiction within Pierce County, there is a target there of how much housing they need will be needed in each of these categories by 2044. So as communities update their comprehensive plans, the new state rules give us a greater requirement for jurisdictions to show our work. As you know, none of our Pierce County communities are in the business of developing housing. So what we need to demonstrate is that we've made adequate provisions to allow others to do so. And each city in the county will need to go through the work of showing this. The first thing that we need to show is that we have adequate land capacity for housing at each of those income levels. So for example, on the previous chart, if it shows that the housing need is 5,000 units in the 50 to 80% AMI housing, we must show that in our land use and our zoning, that there's capacity for at least 5,000 units that could be built in that income range. And the way that that gets done is that the Commerce issued some guidance and they associate certain housing types and certain zoning densities with each income level. So we look at how much capacity is there, and we do a land capacity analysis to better understand where there are gaps in the ability to support housing by income level. And then those gaps can be addressed in a variety of ways, such as allowing new housing types, increasing densities, or rezoning. There's also non-regulatory ways that are suggested in the Commerce guidance, such as funding, changing funding, or supporting non-regulatory measures of various types. But our land capacity analysis that we need to do, it's a very technical analysis, but it is an important part of communities showing that they have the capacity to at least meet the income band target. And it's very different. This is a very different requirement than before, where we could just say, yes, we have a zone that allows townhomes, or we have a zone that allows multifamily housing, and it has capacity. Therefore, we're providing the option for all income types. This is a much more technical requirement with stricter requirements for what we need to show. And we have to realize that from a practical standpoint, we also are likely going to need additional capacity, and that has to be shown in our analysis, because in one area or zone, it may provide 5,000 units of capacity, but we would expect that not all of that capacity will be taken up by one single income band, right? And so a zone or an area in our community may provide capacity at many different income levels. And I know there's a few planners and local officials listening in the room, and if some of that is making you feel a little bit nervous because of meeting Puget Sound regional requirements, Puget Sound Regional Council requirements, just know that PSRC is preparing some guidance about excess capacity needs for affordable housing and consistency with Vision 2050. I had a conversation about that with them last week. So stay tuned. If you're a person who has to be working on one of those technical analysis or reviewing one as a elected or appointed official, just stay tuned that we're going to get some more guidance from PSRC on that. The second thing that we need to do is evaluate our local development codes to remove barriers to affordable housing development. And this is going to require a comprehensive look at our development standards and our zoning that make it difficult to build housing efficiently. So some things like land uses, zoning, height, bulk, setback, parking, landscaping standards, these are likely low-hanging fruit in these evaluations. But we have to realize that as we go and look at some of these standards, it's a very delicate process because our codes have standards to achieve multiple community objectives. And while we want to achieve efficient and affordable housing, we also need to create attractive and livable communities. So for example, we may look at some landscaping standards and think, oh, these are excessive landscaping standards, or it requires an excessive landscaping buffer. And some of those things may be barriers to housing affordability, but we can't eliminate them entirely because communities need open spaces and trees. Those are important needs to support community mental and physical health, to provide privacy, and also to support climate resiliency. So we can expect that when we're removing those barriers, it requires consideration of a variety of community needs. And the last two things that will need to be done is to allow middle housing types. So again, duplexes, triplexes, townhomes, and to make sure that we have provisions for allowing emergency housing. And so those seem like easy changes to make in our zoning code, but we have other legislation that's also touched on related issues. So House Bill 1337 specifically requires the removal of barriers for accessory dwelling units, and it has pretty specific barriers that it asks to be removed. And then there's also House Bill 1110, which came out this last year, and that requires a variety of measures to support middle housing and affordable housing, including some that are based on the size of a city and its proximity to transit. It includes some minimum density requirements in zoning for cities over 25,000 in population. So those types of changes are going to affect our medium and large cities, such as Tacoma and Puyallup, but is not going to have as big of an effect on our smaller cities and towns, say like Gig Harbor or Eatonville. Cities will likely be looking at the changes that they need to make as part of these GMA changes. They're likely to be looking at those in tandem with the reviews of House Bill 1337 and 1110. But in the case of House Bill 1110, first of all, those requirements only apply to cities, so the county won't be reviewing that, for example, but they have an additional 6 months beyond their comprehensive plan updates to complete that work. So we've got a tall order of what needs to be done to support housing and ensure housing across income levels, and we have a long road ahead. Comprehensive plan adoption is our first milestone, and local jurisdictions are supposed to adopt their plan updates by the end of 2024. The challenge is that Commerce guidance came late in our process and required our growth targets to be readopted 9 months after we thought that issue was settled. So the ability of most of our communities to have really nuanced conversations about these types of changes is pretty time limited. And I know from speaking to my planning colleagues around the county that we're all going to do what we can to try our best. But one of the things we need to do is hear from those working in housing and housing affordability about what types of changes are most needed to support affordable housing. The second milestone in another 5 years, we have a check-in. This is a new requirement where we'll look at permit and other trend data to evaluate whether our policy and regulatory shifts are resulting in the development of housing across income levels. Hopefully, this is going to provide us with some additional insights that we can use to fine-tune our approaches. And then finally, it's hard to imagine because we're in the thick of it now, but in another 10 years, we'll be going through another periodic review and update. And this will allow us as that county to really reassess our housing needs, readopt targets, and continue to adjust our strategies to ensure housing for all incomes. Prior to that update, we'll have time to potentially work on our method of allocation. And maybe instead of choosing one of Commerce's methods, we can work with Commerce to develop our own housing target and our own distribution method. So there isn't as big of a difference between Commerce and county estimates of our need. So that's the road ahead. And so I'm just going to end by saying, you know, my grandfather was a farmer, and he told me that the best time to plant blueberries is 20 years ago. And the second best time to plant blueberries is today. And as a long-range planner, I think about that advice all the time. And it's really applicable in the work that we're doing here, because as we look at housing affordability in Pierce County today, and Pierce County isn't unique in the state or the region, we know that we should have been working on housing affordability 20 or even 30 years ago when GMA was first passed. But the second best time is still today. And so I encourage you to get involved in the updates in your communities and advocate for the changes that are most going to help the people who live in our communities. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Erika. That was really informative and very well put. It looks like, oh, that's a clapping hand, not a raised hand. But this is a great time for anybody that has any lingering questions, no matter how big or small. And if anybody has any questions at this moment, this is a good time to do it. Otherwise, I have a question or so. All right, Amy.
Oh, let me turn this off. It's glaring in here. So thank you so much, Erika, that I think I could hear this 20 times and still have lots of questions, because it seems like if you try to push here, it pulls out something else and then you can't do it. Is there any advice on how to look at this so that you can understand the parameters? It's almost as if we were to take you on the road, you'd have to be there to explain, you know, what is mandatory, what is discretionary, what is changeable, and if you change the density here, how does it affect something else? Or by any chance, did you put together a scenario that shows, here's a model where if we design it this way, it will pass code? And then someone would say, well, we don't want, or that kind of density isn't going to work there because it's a task that I'm glad I'm not you.
Well, Councilmember Krueger, I love this question, and I really appreciate this question because I think it gets the heart of something that's so important, which is, you know, from the planning perspective, we're working on all these technical analysis and showing our work and what if we do this and what if we do that. And I honestly think to some extent, it's important that we do these things instead of just assuming that our actions are going to have results. It's important that we do these things, but it's important to also keep in mind that these are estimates, they're exercises that we're doing to try and give us information. And as we go through the process, we can keep estimating and studying and adjusting. But to the heart of your question about, is there a way that we can look at different options and be able to assess them on the whole? From the county's perspective, that's what we're doing with our alternatives in our environmental impact statement. And that's due to be released around the first of the year to the public. I know several other of our communities are doing, in Pierce County, are doing environmental impact statements or supplemental environmental impact statements for their comprehensive plan updates. And that provides an opportunity to say, if we did the housing this way, what are the impacts going to be? And it looks at not just impacts to the environment, but impacts on social and political changes as well. So we have the opportunity to do that. For communities that won't be doing a full environmental impact statement, I think they still do need to go through SEPA requirements. They still need to have public engagement. And those are the kinds of conversations that they can have. But definitely planning for housing is a spider web. And when you pull on one part, it tugs on the whole web. And so the county at least will be using its EIS to look at, if we pull on the web this way, what's going to shift someplace else. And we hope to provide good engagement materials so our community can understand the trade-offs and comment on that during our engagement period.
Because it seems that because so much is based on interpretation, I almost see something in the realm of, if organization A doesn't like something, they can file a grievance with the Growth Management Hearings Board, and it puts things on a stall. It's kind of like where I learned that a business, if they obey the health department, they are violating ecology. If they obey ecology, they are violating the health department. And so how is it possible with all of these parameters come up with a solution that isn't stalemated, is that a word for this, on making progress on what we have to do to accommodate the growth?
So I think that this is a problem, and there's an inherent tension between all of these requirements that we have to meet. And so the best thing that we can do to be appeal proof is to have good public engagement and to go through all of these exercises where we show our work. Ultimately, under growth management, there's 11 goals under growth management, and communities, as long as they're meeting the intent of each of the goals, communities are supposed to have a leeway in how they balance those goals. Some of the leeway gets settled in appeals and case law, undoubtedly, but a lot of lengthy legal battles can be cut short by having a good record and doing the things that the state requires to show our work. But this is one of the inherent, it's the inherent balancing that comes with planning.
And one last thing, if I may, Casey, is, are you able to share where in this mix the application of private property rights are invoked or considered, just as a piece of knowledge? Yeah.
Private property rights is one of the important standards of the Growth Management Act. And so most of our property rights, most of our protection of property rights ends up, we do have policies. Everyone should have policies about that. It's a requirement under GMA in their comprehensive plans, but they end up getting implemented at the code level. And so there are at least minimum things that people are allowed to do with their properties, regardless of the standards. And that's a whole interesting topic of law that I only know a tiny bit about.
Yeah, it's kind of difficult for you to answer because it is a legal thing, but I because it's a federally protected right, I just see it being ignored. So anyway, thank you, and appreciate the information. I guess I want to hear this every time you present it so I can try and capture more knowledge. Thank you, Casey.
Thank you. Do we have any other questions at the moment?
Hi, I'm Nick Moore. I'm the town planner in Eatonville. I was wondering if you could expand upon the allocation methods a little bit further. Because when I go into the tool and look at it, I'm not exactly sure which one I should be paying attention to. So I was wondering if you could go over that a little bit more.
Absolutely, Nick. And hi, nice to see you again.
Good to see you too.
So with allocation methods, if we're gonna talk shop for a second, we're looking at allocation method A
Okay.
for Pierce County. But in lieu of the tool, the allocations, if you go into the tool and you start with our adopted population number, it won't give you the allocations based on the Commerce Compromise. So I would recommend
that was my question, really,
Yes.
was I know that there was some kind of compromise at some point. So how do we, I guess,
in
reconcile
the
that?
chat, Exhibit B has the allocations
Okay.
according, so it's like we memorialize those in the ordinance so that it's clear that we to all of our communities what they're supposed to be planning for.
Right. Okay, that clears
Yeah.
everything up. I appreciate that. Thank you.
No problem.
Thank you for your question, Nick. Anybody else have questions? Just raise your hand or take yourself off of mute. I'm not sure if you can answer this, Erika, because it's more of like kind of a, I mean, I'm sure you can speak to it in some way. I'm just racking my brain trying to understand, what if I'm trying to figure out how to answer or ask it too. So what will jurisdictions do if they have, they have a certain amount they need to meet, a certain amount of need, but the barriers aren't removed adequately? How is that? How do you have any idea how that is going to be checked or monitored, or if one requirement is met but makes another one not be met? Like, is there any kind of check and balance in place with that?
So when communities are finishing up, they're towards the end stage of their plan, a minimum of 60 days before the projected adoption date, they send a checklist to the Department of Commerce, who reviews the changes that are made and then will send comments back to the communities. So that's a first important checklist. I think that communities who have a lot of concern about this, it would be good to be working with Commerce before that 60-day checklist is due. But it isn't, that checklist will have a planner at Commerce will go through, and then ideally they will point out, we think that this could be strengthened or this could be changed, and they provide comments back to the community. So under GMA, comprehensive plans are presumed valid unless they're appealed. So unlike some of our other provisions in state law and other planning laws that we work with, under GMA, if no one appeals your comprehensive plan update, then it's presumed to be valid. So if a community does not get appealed, then it's assumed that they did all the right things. So I think that's an important difference in the way that growth management planning works and what the authority is at the state. Of course, anyone could appeal it. As this group heard from FutureWise a couple of weeks ago, from the beginning of growth management, they have really been a watchdog for issues like that, and they will frequently appeal communities that they think didn't do all the right work. Sometimes community members will do appeals as well. And so unfortunately, that sets the system up for the types of appeals that Councilmember Krueger referred to in her first set of questions. And the best thing that we can do is to show our work and make our best effort.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you for clearing that up. The process makes a lot more sense. and Councilmember Krueger.
Thank you, Casey. Just quickly, Erika, do you by any chance have links or knowledge of when the Department of Commerce may have had meetings discussing this that we could watch to get maybe grasp what was going through their mind when they were making these rules? Or perhaps would it be better to look at the state when they were debating this in legislative committees?
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's a good question. So I think there is some value at looking at some of the state debate on the topic. But Commerce was given quite a lot of leeway to develop guidance to implement that state direction. So if you look back at some of those state debates, you're definitely going to see debates that are going to give you a better idea of what the intent was. But Commerce went through a process that took about a year and a half, 2 years to develop the guidance, and they were given substantial leeway. Commerce has a number of, they just released all of their final guidance documents this week or last week, but like within the last week, some basically. And if you go to the Department of Commerce Growth Management Services website, they do have a number of webinars, and they do have a number of guidance documents that talk about why they made the guidance and how they made it the way that it is today.
That I didn't know that. That's very helpful. Do you know if they are having meetings or town halls to, in different areas? Because I know that PSRC is to help explain, the Vision 2050. And do you know if they are, if Department of Commerce is doing that as well?
Yeah, so while they were developing their guidance and the HAPT, they did have a variety. They had a panel of various city and county staff that worked on a work group in the development of the guidance. And then I know that they've had webinars explaining the guidance. I think mostly the webinars have been geared toward a technical audience. I don't know how many have been geared toward the general public or even elected and appointed officials.
Well, maybe we could encourage them to do that. That's okay. Great. Thank you. Thank you,
You're
Casey.
welcome.
Absolutely. Great questions. And I'll include some links to those webinars, or at least where to find those webinars in the follow-up email that I'll send. That'll have the recording and the slides from today as well. And we've got another few minutes if anybody else has any questions. Just feel free to come off mute or raise your hand. Robin. You are still muted. I can do that for you.
Thank you. Got it.
There we go.
Yeah. I didn't have lunch, so I'm a little lightheaded. Sorry. Yeah, great job as always, Erika. Thank you. As soon as I think I understand stuff, I learn new things every time you talk. So at a couple of housing workshops that we've had recently, there seems to be rumors floating around in Gig Harbor, maybe elsewhere, that there are communities that have opted out, that are telling the state to go pound sand and are not moving forward. I've been able to debunk a couple of those with calls. Thank you, Tanner. But I guess I don't have a great answer for folks that ask, what happens if we don't do this, other than understanding that there's funding, transportation grants and things. I'm wondering if there is, I don't know, a list or something that is more explicit about what types of grants. I'm sure I could look it up, but if it's available, I'd love to be able to say, we're going to lose, X millions of dollars, and our engineers have given me some estimates, but do you know what I'm getting at? Like what is the worst case scenario, and how do I, counter this, because it keeps popping up?
If there is one, Robin, I don't know where it is, and I would love to see a list of that stuff. I think the one hammer that Commerce does have is that if we don't adopt our provisions, the required provisions, or we don't adopt them in a timely manner, they can put us on the do not fund, basically a do not fund list, and we would lose funding from any state agency, usually most importantly, Department of Transportation. We would lose that funding, but also sometimes other forms of state economic development assistance because we don't have a comprehensive plan, a valid comprehensive plan. I don't know how many times that's actually been done. And I think it's a big hammer that isn't used very often. But having worked for a community that I'm not going to name, but a community that definitely decided they were not going to follow a provision of a pretty major provision of growth management back in the early 2000s. I know that when that hammer comes down, it can be pretty painful. So it hasn't come down very often, but when it does, it can be pretty serious. So yeah, I don't know if there's a list of exactly what that means or if we know how many times it's been done, but I have worked for a community that did it. And they got the opportunity to have lots of appeals as well and establish some precedents in state law. So that's always exciting.
I appreciate it.
Yeah, great question. And I remember the workshop that I went to, that came up a lot. So yeah, absolutely. Any last minute questions? We have about a couple minutes. We can happily end a couple minutes early if everybody is satisfied with their questions and everything, but I'll give another moment. Just take yourself off mute or raise your hand or both. All right, I'm not seeing any, and if I'm missing you or something, just take yourself off mute and start chatting. But otherwise, I think that's gonna wrap us up for today. So yeah, definitely thank everyone for being here. I think these conversations are really, really good. The discussions and questions that we get are, I really think, unearthing a lot of the questions we may not even know we have. So I really appreciate everybody continuing to tune in and sit with us on your lunch break, whether you're eating or not. We do have more, so please sign up for our newsletter, receive the invites regularly for future lunch and learns. So the next one is going to be on the 21st with Shape with Jason. So that one's gonna be great. It's gonna be focused around HB 1110. And I know it's going to be a really great presentation. I'd also like to mention that next week, Wednesday, September 13th, from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m., there's going to be a community workshop in Puyallup to talk about their comprehensive plan. So if you're interested in what they're planning, maybe pop by there. Maybe I'll see you there. I'm going to throw that here in the chat as well, really quick for y'all. There we go. And if you are not able to attend but are interested in what they're doing, there is also an interactive survey. Here's a link to that as well. Those are going to be, yeah, those are the two links that I have for you for that, if you're interested. And like I said, join us for the next one. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your day and a good rest of your week.